in the previous year. Not ever cheated, cheated in the previous year. And of course, cheating is easier and easier to do, particularly as we move from agrarian life to major cities. There's a higher density of people. It's easier to find recreational sex. It's easier to find sex on the internet these days. You can find sex, particularly in the West. You could pull out your phone, you can pull up an app, and you can find people who are interested in having sex with you, regardless of your sexuality. For example, on the iPhone, there's an application called Grindr for gay men. Very easy. It pinpoints them with GPS that shows them all over the place, men who are looking for sex. AshleyMadison.com is a website mostly for heterosexuals. There's 11 million registered users who are looking to cheat on their married spouses. 11 million registered users. So this clearly shows that monogamy might exist as the cultural ideal, but privately, people want something different.
Okay.
They may be afraid to say that, but they do.
Okay, well, what about the legal and religious implications? Because, like, you can practice polygamy in so many countries, and then the religious bodies, especially Christianity, frown against the practice. What do you think about that?
Well, all major religions have had polygamy at one point or time in their history. And if there's anything you can be sure with any of the Abrahamic religions is they will change their tune as they desire, right? So that this notion, for example, that marriage is about one man and one woman, one woman that you hear repeated in the West, well, that's absolute and complete and total rubbish. They know very well that under Christianity, multiple wives were acceptable, that the Catholic Church, in fact, married two men before the Catholic Church married a man and a woman. So this notion that marriage has always been one man, one woman is completely erroneous. And any religious leader who tells you otherwise is either completely ignorant of their religious history or they're downright lying to you. So marriage changes its practices depending on the political powers who are in, what they determine that they believe is morally acceptable. Religion changes as the mores of the time change. And we can see this occurring in Africa now. We can see that Africa was not interested in laws against homosexuality until the oppressive British came along and forced their homophobic laws onto Africa. And now that Britain has lost those homophobic laws, Africa is struggling with issues of homosexuality. With many countries it's illegal. A few countries there's the death penalty. And in other countries like South Africa, men can actually be married together. So I would say that this isn't a matter of religion. This is a matter of people speaking their mind in the name of religion. Okay,
but like I was discussing with somebody about the issue of polygamy, and the first thing that came to the person's mind was like the fact that the evil associated with polygamy is much more than what you should even try to experiment with. So it's like, don't you think that we should look at what happens at the end of the day, or maybe the implications of practicing polygamy? Like in Africa, you have several women. There is always a quarrel, the children don't like each other, and it's always leading to fatalities at times. What do you think about that?
I think that all governments should be careful in creating legislation that says that adults have lost their free will. And if adults want to enter into a polyamorous or polygamous relationship, then adults should have that right. As long as they're free from economic hardship, as long as they're making the choices out of their own volition, then I'm not in favor of a government trying to tell individuals or groups of people how they must live their sexual and romantic lives. This is the same line with homosexuality. The church has absolutely no business influencing the laws of the land, creating homophobic laws. Adults should be able to do what they choose to do, and this is something that I believe comes to us as the freedom of our own will. What happens in one's bedroom, what happens in one home, doesn't affect other people. Polygamous marriages are recognized, for example, by the United Kingdom. If a triad was together, a man had multiple wives in another country and immigrates to the United Kingdom, the United Kingdom will recognize that relationship. And if my next door neighbors are polygamous, in no way, shape, or form does that hurt me. And if my next door neighbors are a same-sex male couple, in no way, shape, or form does that hurt me. And if my neighbor next door has been divorced 5 times, again, that doesn't hurt me. So I think these are matters of free will and free agency, and we should be free to make these choices regardless of one's religious beliefs.
Yeah, and that leads me to the issue of divorce, like having somebody who has divorced 5 times.
Yes.
Do you think there's any difference between him and the person who is having 5 partners?
Well, in fact, no. All that really is serial monogamy. And so here's what, for example, today's youth are doing. They're free to have recreational sex. They no longer have to be, ready to be married before they can have sex. Or certainly they don't have to be married to have sex anymore. So university students all throughout the West are having sex like crazy, right? But they have to be in love with the individual, or at least under the pretense that they're going to potentially date. Now, this is beginning to change, and they're starting to allow themselves to have recreational sex. But it used to be, particularly when we were growing up, it was okay to have sex as long as it was with your partner. Well, so what men would do is they would pretend to be interested in a girl, they would have sex with her, then they break up with her, then they go to another girl, they'd be interested in her, they'd have sex with her, they break up with her, right? And of course, many men would do this in marriages as well. They have sex, they break up. By allowing ourselves to have sex without the stigma, to have just recreational sex without stigma, by allowing both men and women the right to have sexual recreation without emotional investment, then we can begin to erode at that system of serial monogamy. Men won't be trapped into marriages so that they can have the sex and then divorce and have someone else. It's the same thing with decreasing cultural homophobia. By decreasing cultural homophobia, you're no longer forcing gay men and lesbians to marry in heterosexual relationships, only then to break up 20 years later and say, look, I've actually never been in love with you. I just had to do this because my culture is so homophobic. So what I'm suggesting is when we remove the stigma about sexual practices, it's actually better for all involved.
Yeah, and finally, I want to look at the idea of people running away from marriage these days, especially in the Western world. You could have people having partners for 20 years, 30 years. Maybe could it be because they want to have the opportunity of cheating without the hassles of getting through divorce?
Well, I think men do cheat so that they can have the sex without a hassle of getting through divorce. I think the real problem is, though, the reason I wrote the book is I've seen so many fine couples. A couple that's been together for, as you say, 20 years, and maybe they have kids together, and they've got a mortgage together, and they've got a great life together, and they have lots of history together. And it's a very functioning couple. But the man runs off and has sex because he has sexual desires that he wants to have met. And the woman is taught by society that she's supposed to be victimized by it, that it's the ultimate betrayal of their love. And I argue that, well, no, it's not. It's not an ultimate betrayal in any capacity. And I suggest if you're going to divorce your partner and you're going to rid yourself of that amazing history you have together, do it for a more substantial reason than just who one had an orgasm with. And this applies for both men and women. If you're going to divorce your partner because the relationship is not functioning well anymore. Not because there's a lack of sex, or not because somebody else has run off and had sex on the side while they're away on a business trip. Divorce your partners only if the relationship is emotionally unhealthy. Other than that, divorcing somebody simply because of who they had sex with, that's really a short-sighted venture, because divorce doesn't help anybody. It's hard on the kids, it's hard on those being divorced. And I argue, if we didn't expect lifelong monogamy, we would have a lot less divorce.
Yeah, and in newspaper investigation recently said like a lot of people were talking about losing the interest in their partners because the children have all grown up, they've gone out of the house to get married to their own partners, and they're no longer interested in their partner they've been married to for 20, 30, 40 years, just because the children moved away. Any relationship between the presence of the children and their absence later?
Well, certainly couples can stay together for the sake of children, and then once children are out of the house, the couple might look at each other and realize that they actually don't have that much in common anymore. Certainly that can happen. And in cases like that, I'm not saying that couples should remain together. Particularly when the kids are out of the house, let them have the freedom to do as they will. But there's a real difference between today's youth and the older generation. In many essences, the older generation, they feel like they invented sex. And this is what happened. They weren't allowed to have sex before marriage. Finally, they got married. They began to have sex. But they didn't have pornography to really see all of the different things they could do in bed together. And so, essentially, they felt like they invented sex. And they got a much longer lifespan out of their sexual lives. But today's youth, they grow up in a completely different culture. First of all, they begin consuming pornography around age 11, oftentimes earlier. So by the time a youth enters his sexual maturity, he already knows everything about sex. He's seen it all, he knows all of the positions, he knows all of the, you name it, he knows it, right? So in that essence, they've already been desensitized to sex. So that when they begin having sex, they also begin having sex at a younger age. We don't have to wait till we're married anymore to have sex. So in England, people are losing their virginities at 14, 15. 16 is considered a bit late these days. They're having sex, and they're having sex with multiple people because they no longer have to be in a relationship to have that sex. So they're having sex with friends and sex with strangers from a younger age. They've got all of the pornography. It's available on their smartphones. Sex is absolutely everywhere. What this means is that the sexual life they get out of any one monogamous relationship doesn't last nearly as long as it did for their grandparents. They're already desensitized to the sex. And what that means is that today's youth generation is going to have to face this issue of monogamy in a way which is much stronger than those from the generations past. Not only do they want sex quicker, but it's easier to get that sex. So grandparents may have wanted, perhaps grandpa wanted to cheat on grandma, but it wasn't so easy to do. But today, boy, it's really easy. With the internet, it's really easy.
So it could be the reason why marriages in the past lasted for so long, even lasted into eternity. But nowadays, like marriage, just like a few years, they pack it up.
Absolutely. Wow. And think about this. In the 1950s in the West, we erroneously and absolutely quite stupidly believed that masturbation was an evil. That we believed since the dawn of the 20th century, really up until the late 1980s, that 1990s really, that masturbation would lead to all kinds of health problems. It's absolutely a joke. There's no basis for it whatsoever, and quite the opposite. Masturbation is very healthy. It's a fantastic outlet. It's good for the body, right? So married men in the 50s and 60s and 70s, if they divorced, that would mean that their regular source of sex would end. And they believed that masturbating was bad for them, that it would make them mentally deranged. Well, there's a lot more reason to stay with your partner. But today, men are free to masturbate. They don't need to have a woman in order to have that orgasm. They can have it on their own, so they're less likely to stay with a partner that they're unhappy with because they're allowed to have that sexual outlet regardless of what society, well, society now permits them to have that sexual outlet.
Thank you very much, Professor, and it's nice having you, and we hope we'll be able to quickly lay our hands on the book, The Monogamy Gap, Men, Love, and the Reality of Cheating, which will be out in the book markets very, very soon. So it's nice having you with us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Same here.